Sometimes we need to code one if statement within another. This is called nesting if statements. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to make up some hypothetical rules for calculating the tuition of a college student. So let's say if this person is a US citizen, here we're going to have two scenarios. One is that they are a resident of California. In that case, the tuition is going to be 0. But the other scenario is for people outside of California, so non-resident. Then we're going to set the tuition to 1,000. So these are the two scenarios for US citizens. But what if someone is not a US citizen? We're going to have a different rule. In this case, we're going to set the tuition to 3,000. Let's see how we can code these rules in C++. So first we need a variable to check to see if this person is a US citizen or not. So I'm going to declare a boolean called isCitizen and set it to true. Now, if isCitizen equals true, here we add braces. Now in this scenario, we're going to have two sub-scenarios. But before we implement them, let's simplify this expression. Whenever we have a boolean in our if statement, we don't have to compare it with true or false. We can simplify this expression like this. So if isCitizen, a value is to true, then this block is going to get executed. What if you want to compare this with false? Well, instead of writing a long expression like this, we can apply the not operator over here. So if isCitizen is false, by applying the not operator, we reverse that value, so we get true, and then this block gets executed, okay? So here is our first scenario. If someone is a US citizen, now we have two sub-scenarios. Are they a resident of California or not? Well, we need another boolean for that. We can call that California resident. We set it to true. Now, within this if statement, we're going to code another if statement. So if California resident, then we need to set the tuition to 0. But first, let's declare a variable called tuition. We set it to 0. And over here, we set tuition to 0. Now, if they are not a resident of California, we're going to set the tuition to 1,000. Okay? So here are our first two scenarios. Now, in this case, we have nested one if statement inside another. Here we refer to the top if statement as the outer statement, outer if statement, and this other statement as the inner if statement, okay? Now, what if someone is not a US citizen? So here we need an else clause, and here we're going to set the tuition to 3,000, okay? So this is what we call nesting if statements. Now, technically, there are no limitations in terms of how deep we're going to get with nesting. For example, over here, we could have a block, and in this block, we could have another if statement. But as you can see, code like this ends up getting a little bit hard to read and understand. So it's best to avoid more than 2 levels of nesting. I know sometimes this is impossible because we might be dealing with really complex rules, but sometimes we can simplify these if statements and avoid really deep nested if statements. You'll learn about them as you go through the course and gain more experience, okay? Now, let's remove this if statement as well as the braces. Now, let me show you that there is a way to simplify this code a little bit. So look, over here, we have initialized tuition to 0. So there's really no need to set this again to 0. This is unnecessary. It's redundant, right? So how can we simplify these if statements? Well, over here, instead of checking to see if this person is a California resident, we can check to see if they are outside of California. Then we set the tuition to 1,000. So here we can apply the not operator. We're saying if this person is not a California resident, then we're going to set the tuition to 1,000, right? Now we don't need the else clause. So we can get rid of one extra line. That's better, okay? So this is all about nesting if statements.